No.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Joe, and thanks to the wonderful band, not just for the music as we walked up, but for the AI pieces that we heard earlier. As fantastic as it was, I think we'll now move from AI to real intelligence, human intelligence, is what we're here for. I have prepared a very long introduction for both Bak Song as well as Mel, but in the interest of time, and you can go check out their LinkedIn profiles, I'll just condense and summarize this to a few key points that I think is essential for you to know as we delve into the conversation today of Singapore riding the next wave. By way of introduction, Bak Song was a career journalist, focusing on desks such as Parliament, politics, arts and literature, but most importantly, he is a country brand consultant, having written and spoken extensively on the topic for more than a decade. The very pertinent point that you need to know as well, and we'll talk a lot more about this later, is Bak Song was also on the marketing advisory panel for our very well-known and well-loved Passion Made Possible tourism slogan. So thanks for that, Bak Song, and we look forward to hearing from you. A few key points about Malminderjit Singh as well, or Mel as we call him. He's a man of many interests and skills. His background started in the civil service, both with agencies such as the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, as well as more than 5 years as a career journalist at the Business Times, covering SMEs, the economics and trade. So very trade focused. That's the first thing you need to know about him, trade and economics. And the second part is, among the many hats he wears, most notably is his contributions to social cohesion, racial harmony in Singapore, as chair of Harmony Circle, founder of onehumanity.sg, and many others as well. So we will talk a lot more with Mel later about things that matter to us, staying united in a divisive world. And the last point I'll say about Mel is he's also an appointed Justice of the Peace. So if anybody's looking to get married and needs somebody to officiate your wedding, he's your man, all right? Now, with that, let me get straight into the substance of what we want to talk about today. We're going to focus a lot about Singapore, all right? And we're going to get a sense and a pulse of where we are, where we're going, how we're going to get there. Let me start by asking a very simple question. And I'll reference a few dates through the conversation today. 29 November, 1990. 12 August, 2004. These were celebrated days in Singapore's history because we had our first and second leadership transitions. Earlier this year, on the 15th of May, we had our third leadership transition from PM Lee Hsien Loong to PM Lawrence Wong. It was also marked by being the first leadership transition without the reassuring presence as we are now in the post-LKY era. All right? The question I have for you is very simple. 15 May 2024. Will this day mark business as usual for Singapore, or will we look back on this day as the start of something new? Bak Song, we'll start with you.
Right. Thanks very much, Dylan. There are many aspects we could talk about, but in the limited time that we have, and also because of the focus of this panel, I'm going to focus all my remarks on Singapore's country brand and its soft power. Now, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has said that under his administration, the ruling party is prepared to, quote, re-examine all assumptions, unquote. So among all the things that I hope the government will do, I'm going to just highlight one, which is that I hope the government will re-examine Singapore's approach to projecting its soft power, because I believe there's a lot of potential that's untapped and many missed opportunities. At the sectoral level, agencies like the Singapore Tourism Board are doing a great job promoting Singapore's, both in terms of its hard power and soft power. In the MICE space, hard power would mean things like our excellent infrastructure and facilities and so on. But the soft power is about the culture, intangible attributes, the inherent merits of the place. At the national level, However, most of what is done, most of our priorities are around hard power, FTAs, FDI, basically anything that adds to the GDP. When it comes to something soft or intangible like culture, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has traditionally never had cultural attaches. So while the French embassy has run the Voila Festival, that's spelled V-O-I-L-A-H, for many years, there is no equivalent in Paris. And just to cite one example. So it's a matter of priority, and definitely more could be done. And the key message that I want to put across today to our friends in this industry is that soft power needs a showcase, it needs brand ambassadors, and any MICE event can be such a platform. I'll say more about this in the rest of our conversation.
So in a nutshell, we all have the power to exhibit or yield in our own way and form through MICE soft power, right?
Yes.
Mel, what about you? What do you think about this
Well,
seismic change on 15 May?
Thanks, Dylan. Well, firstly, I mean, it's very early to tell. It's only been a month or two. I think on one level, you know, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong brings a lot of predictability and certainty and, you know, assurance because he's a product of the system, right? He has been a part of the civil service for the longest time, including as PPS to former Prime Minister Lee, and also been in cabinet for a while. So it's no surprises really, right? So very much a product of the system. So I don't expect him to rock the boat very much in that sense. And I think you also see that in terms of, you know, his choice of Deputy Prime Minister as well. He went with a trusted, safe, and familiar choice. But having said that though, you know, I do think that Singapore is at a crossroads now. And it's interesting because Prime Minister Wong has assumed his role at a time where Singapore is maturing as an economy, maturing as a democracy, and maturing as a society, right? And I say maturing in the sense that it's probably an inflection point where, you know, like all mature individuals, you start asking questions, you start questioning, you start also being, you know, having more needs as well, right? And I think that is the kind of dynamics in which Prime Minister Wong will start his current term, and certainly after the next general election as well. And I think there is probably a need, therefore, given this backdrop, for the PM to then negotiate a new social compact with Singapore and Singaporeans. So I think that in that process, we might see some changes. He has, as Mak Song has said, he has initiated and indicated that he will, you know, drift from the past in approaches. And I think he's a more consultative person, so you will see some of that shifting as well. But I don't think the goalposts are going to shift very much.
Thank you. So, in a nutshell, business as usual, but time will tell.
Yeah.
Right? Let me move on into a first aspect of country branding. And I think growing up in Singapore, one of my first recollections, impressions that I personally resonated with was in the later part of the 20th century. Singapore was often in the media, often alluded to as one of the 4 Asian tigers. And that was incredibly strong branding when we saw the rise, or the early days of the rise of Asia. The 21st century has really been often described as the Asian century, right? And I thought that today, as we are at the quarter century mark, will be a useful time to assess the Asian century, which differs from the 4 Asian tigers, which Singapore was a named entity in, but the Asian century is really marked by India and China, right? How do we stay relevant, and what is our positioning in the world today? And I'll start with Mel on this.
It's a great question, Dylan, and I will take a more economic lens to this. You're right. I mean, the East Asian tigers of the past in the 80s and the 90s were built very much on this idea of manufacturing base and, you know, attracting FDI and stuff. As I mentioned earlier in my previous response, Singapore has matured as an economy, and we perhaps got there much faster than most other economies in the world, right? And that has come at a cost as well. Now, the question is, you mentioned India and China. I would throw in Indonesia as well in that mix, you know, as a rising force to be reckoned with in this part of the world. You know, when I think the questions to ask is that when China opened up its economy in 1978, and you know, Singapore remained relevant in the sense that Singapore was a go-to partner in the know-how of many things, you know, economic, attracting FDI, liberalizing its economy, and you know, much of the economic know-how. And question is whether Singapore still continues to play that role for China today, you know, about 40 plus years later. India opened its economy in 1991, right? And Singapore also played that role for India in the years afterwards. The question to ask again as well is whether Singapore still continues to play that role for India today. I doubt so. I doubt so. And I say this because you know I speak to you know business delegations from both India and China, and yes, there's a desire to engage Singapore, but at a different level, right? And today, I mean, honestly, if anyone here is doing business in the likes of India, you would know that you know everybody and anybody from around the world is queuing up to get in there. What is the point and what is the relevance for Singapore today in those in that context? The same goes with the rest of ASEAN as well. So I think the question ahead of facing Singapore is today, how can we maintain our economic relevance to these you know, rising powers, given that they are catching up fast, the rest of the region is catching up fast? What more can we offer them that we haven't already offered?
That's a very good point. I think I just want to add that just last week, the Singapore Tourism Board, as well as a representation group from SACEOS, did a business mission to India. And I understand from my conversations with some of my peers in the room that what struck them was the hunger of India as an economy to catch up and to influence the 21st Asian century as well. Pak Song, what are your views on this as Singapore transitions from Asian tigers to the Asian century?
Right. Well, the theme of this conference is moments and momentum. For Singapore, the rise of Asia, the Asian century, is its moment. But when it comes to momentum, I think for that to be sustained, Singapore has to do more to build its country brand and to win friends and fans. Now, just as a bit of a reality check and to give well, Asia has advanced tremendously in recent years around the criteria of hard power. But you know, things like GDP, number of MICE events, etc. But when it comes to soft power, I think most of you would agree that there is definitely still a gap. Just to illustrate with a simple example, I was in a restaurant and bar more than a week ago, and this restaurant and bar was decorated with the flags of all the countries participating in the Euro 2024 football tournament.
You were not in a bar in Singapore. Was it in Singapore or somewhere?
Singapore.
In Singapore,
This was in Singapore. But if you flip it around, think of the reverse. Bars in Europe being decorated with the flags of Asian nations for the Asian Cup. I've never seen that happening. I wonder if I'll see that for the rest of my lifetime. It may not be an exaggeration. So now all of us who work in marketing or any form of communications would know that to win mindshare, there are three main levels: awareness, appreciation, and affinity. So people can know of you or know you, they can understand you, but to get them to like you requires a much deeper connection. So what I'm trying to argue is that this is the area that Singapore needs to focus on in this new era, building its country brand and its soft power.
Likability.
Yes.
Affinity.
Affinity, brand affinity.
Talking about brand affinity, I think all of us fully recognize that a man who is synonymous with Singapore's branding, and you know, you spoke about does China still need us, does India still need us, and our early days were really marked by Lee Kuan Yew being our elder statesman, going out there, being relevant to the world, showcasing relevance. But a lot of people don't realize the extent of which he was the brand architect for Singapore. right? And I draw my mind back to the very early days in 1965, or 1967 in this particular case, where Lee Kuan Yew first coined the term Garden City. And in his speech, he actually defined it further, where he said, "Will be a country full of beautiful flowers and trees, and as neat and litterless as possible." Right? Today, we still hold true to that definition, although the term Garden City has since been reinvented with City in a Garden, and more recently with the Green Plan, a city within nature, right? But the point I wanted to make was his line about beautiful flowers and trees, as neat and litterless as possible, still applies till today. And it was probably, as the Garden City, one of our earliest brand slogans for Singapore. But it was a much simpler time. One brand slogan, appreciated, understood, and hopefully affinity as well, by both an internal and external audience. Today, we live in a far more complicated world. Do brand slogans still work for countries? And is it different from the perspective of an internal and external audience? Bak Song?
Well, Singapore's hard power facets are very well known. Stability, reliability, etc. The deficit is in soft power. Now, for country branding, I've seen a lot of misunderstanding and incomplete understanding of what it entails. Much of what people think is branding is actually marketing, which is a subset of branding. Now, to describe the difference in the simplest terms, in marketing, you're trying to sell an item. In branding, you're trying to sell an idea. Now, a country brand can be built by design or by default and diffusion. Country branding by design would be, for example, an ad put out by the STB. That's everybody is familiar with that. But when it comes to default and diffusion, which is actually what goes on most of the time, it's kind of like it takes on a life of its own. So brand building by default would be, for example, any news, major news that happens over which we have no control. So it could be negative or positive. Now, for brand building by diffusion, the third aspect, I think earlier this month, I managed to find what I think is an almost perfect positive example. And this is the first time I'm sharing it at a public forum.
We'd love to hear.
Earlier this month, I was traveling through England and Poland. And I took the chance to visit the Raffles Hotel in Warsaw. Now, some of you would know that, or remember these details, that the Raffles Hotel and Raffles Holdings was sold in 2005. So for 20 years, Singapore has had no direct control over the brand. I used to feel quite sad about that. I think I'm not alone. But I cheered up when I was at the Raffles Hotel in Warsaw, and this is why. I visited the Long Bar in Warsaw, and I saw the Singapore sling being sold. There was a write-up in the menu. Then I went to the hotel reception, and there were 2 clocks in the hotel lobby. A clock showing the time in Singapore, and the other the time in Warsaw. So what is happening there is that effectively, since 2005, the Raffles Hotel has been helping to build brand Singapore on autopilot, FOC. And this is happening in 23 Raffles hotels around the world, from Manila to Maldives to even Mecca. So this brings me to the key message that I hope I can leave with the audience this morning, which is that all of you can be like the Raffles Hotel. All of you can be like the Raffles Hotel. Let me explain.
Are you saying we can all be grand old dames?
In a way. What I mean is, all of us can do something to add to brand Singapore while achieving our personal and professional goals, which is what the Raffles Hotel has been doing for the last 20 years. Now, to the man in the street, most people would think that country branding must be the job of someone who works in STB or EDB, etc. It boils down to what we would say in Hokkien Singlish, "Bowai Tai Chi." Well, this is the mindset that I'm trying to change, the mindset shift. So, what I'm trying to persuade people to do is, number one, to think more deeply about that, how the country brand relates to them individually, number one, and number two, to be inspired to feel that they can do something about it. There's something that they can do to contribute, to build by design, by default and by diffusion. It's like the old slogan from Total Defense, there's a part for everyone. And this is true it applies to the CEO of a MICE company, to the newest intern in the backstage crew, and anyone can contribute. It's kind of like the bricklayer realizing that he's actually building a cathedral.
Right.
So if any of you are organizing a Singapore MICE event overseas, and you're in one of the 23 locations, consider the Raffles Hotel as a location. I don't work for the Raffles Hotel in any way. This is just to further extend my example. And if it's a MICE event in Singapore, well, my suggestion is take a moment to consider every aspect of that event. The conference theme, the door gifts, the dinner entertainment, what can be tweaked to include an expression of brand Singapore.
So if Singapore, I always tell my friends that if Singapore does well, we do well. But importantly, I think what you're saying is if everybody's vested, if we do well individually, collectively, Singapore will do well too. Mel, if I can just go to you for a little bit here. You've got a very, I suppose, varied experiences, both in your day capacity, leading a strategic consultancy, dealing with business leaders, international guests. But at the same time, you spend a lot of time working with the community, right? A lot of ground-up initiatives. How do you see Singapore's branding from an internal and external perspective? Does it differ?
Yeah, I would like to, touch on maybe one thing that Malcolm Singh mentioned, and also maybe talk a bit about this idea of brand. You mentioned brand slogan earlier, Dylan, and I think, yes, they are relevant. They still continue to be relevant, but I feel that there must be a follow-through. So having a slogan just looking pretty and looking captive without any substance to back it or any evidence to show that that slogan rings true, can sometimes be a disconnect. And I do feel that in Singapore, we have a brand disconnect. The global brand, Singapore is known globally still today for its economic prowess, right? Small state, made great, third world nation, the first world nation, that whole spiel, right? But how many global Singapore companies and business leaders can we count in the world? So to me, that's a disconnect, yes, in the past we had industry leaders like Singapore Airlines, right, and one or two others, but are they still at the forefront of the industry? I don't know, right?
The financial statements suggest so.
Financially, yes, but innovative-wise, and a lot of indicators also show that, some of these companies have been, surpassed in a number of areas and categories. So the question is, how can we get that idea of Singapore's economic prowess to be scaled up, right? So that when people identify Singapore, it says, yes, here's a company or here's a business leader from Singapore, which represents what Singapore stands for, at least in the external world, that's brand prowess. And I don't think it's a question about size either, because you have many examples around the world of small countries producing great companies, great innovative ideas, and also great business leaders, right? So why are we falling short on that? I think that's a question we need to ask. Bak Song mentioned whether whose responsibility it is, and I think that's a great point, because I do think that maybe it's time that if we took a more whole of government approach, sorry, my civil service, former civil service personality shines through when I say whole of government, but I think it's time to take a whole of government approach to think about how do we project Singapore's soft power or brand image overseas, outside of Singapore. Maybe it's something for MCI they now call MDDI, I think, or MIDD, to look into. So I think there is definitely a gap in that sense.
Okay, talking about that, and I hope our friends from STB were taking notes on what they can do to project Singapore's brand profile internationally. Let's take a look now into specifically our tourism slogans, right? Since this is a MICE industry, we're all, in many ways and forms, in the tourism industry. Bak Song, you were part of the team that came up with Passion Made Possible, right? And let's take a step back and look at it historically and holistically. In the last 59 years, Singapore has had 6 tourism slogans. For those who don't know, let me just do a very quick recap. In our early days, we would call Instant Asia. Sounds like instant noodles. But Instant Asia was our very first tourism slogan, because in Singapore, we represented the sights, the sounds, the cultures of most of the major ethnic groups within Asia. In 1984, we moved to Surprising Singapore, because people didn't expect our brand values like the Garden City that we spoke about earlier, and they thought Asia was, backward, and they came to Singapore, and Singapore prided itself on being the most surprising tropical island on earth. We were clean, we were modern. In 1995, we embraced New Asia, really a juxtaposition of our economic development, in line with us being Asian tigers at that time, with the cultural precincts and traditions that we had. So New Asia represented coming together of both. Post-SARS, and I think a lot of us will remember this, we became uniquely Singapore. We had new service offerings, Great Singapore Sale, World Gourmet Summit. Events became a central feature. 2010, we became your Singapore. Everybody had a stake in the game. It was a vested process. 2017, I believe, Passion Made Possible came alive. Today, especially as we talk a lot more about sustainability, a lot more about wellness, do we need to reinvent our tourism slogan? Because tourism, country branding, like any country, cannot stay still. Bak Song.
To your question, whether we need to change Passion Made Possible, the short answer is no.
I thought you would say that. You were behind it.
No, actually to clarify, I was not involved in formulating it. I was on the marketing advisory panel, just advising on the marketing of the tagline and the concept. So the short answer is no, because Passion Made Possible actually, in my opinion, has no expiry date. And that's because we need to differentiate between the big picture brand concept and the tagline and other marketing expressions which are much more downstream. So there's upstream, the whole concept, and downstream marketing expressions. So, for example, if we want to emphasize new facets like sustainability and wellness, then yes, of course, we have to refresh the marketing expressions, the taglines for ads and so on. But this doesn't mean that we need to change the brand concept, which should remain. And in fact, we could use it practically forever.
Interchangeably as well. STB recently launched a campaign titling Singapore as the world's best MICE city. And I think that's only possible with passion of many of us in the industry. Mel, anything to add? Do you think we need to refresh our social compact with tourism to have a new perspective on wellness and sustainability?
Yeah, certainly. I go back to my previous point about the brand disconnect, right? The current slogan about passion. How do we showcase that? What is it about? What is it about passion from Singapore that we're trying to showcase? Where are those stories that we want to highlight to support that slogan. I don't see that coming true, to be honest, right? I thought and I was joking to Baksong this morning when the AI was churning out lyrics. I thought the last line, passion gives us flight, was a good one, right? And so if STB does do that, please do credit the MICE Forum for that as well. No, but jokes aside, I think that kind of disconnect is there. But the truth be told, and I'm being very candid here, why would anyone coming into Singapore visit Singapore? What does Singapore have to offer, right? Is it an Asian city? Yes, there are many others. Is it cheap? No, it's not. Is it a shopping destination? Yes, it is. But there are many others as well. Do we have sites of nature and sounds? Maybe. Maybe with the Mandai Wildlife Reserve now we can offer that. Sustainability, ecotourism as well, right? So why would somebody who has come to Singapore once come back for a second time? I think that's the point we're going to keep asking ourselves, because we're not as cheap as the rest of the region, right? If you're looking for multiculturalism, there are other options in the region. You're looking for cheaper tourist travel options, there are other options in the region. So why would people come to Singapore?
Okay, I'm just going to move tact very quickly to talk about, you talk about the disconnect earlier. And I think one thing that the recent years have shown us is that there is a global disconnect, even within populations, within neighbors. There's more distrust in the world. And in international relations, there are deeper rifts, right? People are a little bit more cautious, more mindful of each other, and within communities as well. Singapore's not immune to these global fractures around the world. And I think my key question to you, Mel, would be, how can we keep Singapore unified in an increasingly diverse and divisive world?
Well, I spoke about the social compact. I think that's going to become increasingly important. Multiculturalism is always a work in progress. And I just had this discussion yesterday with a group of people as well who are looking at one aspect of that. And, we can go back in history and say, look, we had this and this, and this is how far we have come. But the truth, to be told, it's such a fragile thing, right? And divisiveness, as we've seen, around the world, can creep in anytime. I mean, we look at Europe, and we have far right-wing parties today taking more center stage in European politics, or in France, and you can see how the shift between right and left shows that there is a great polarization, right? I think what's important is to make sure and maintain that in terms of politics, in terms of society, in terms of governance, that the middle, the center holds true. The reason why the left and right are getting more traction in different parts of the world is because the center has failed, right? So as a government, as a society, Singapore must always make sure that the center holds true, is relevant for its people, caters to the needs and aspirations for its people, and can help the country punch well above its weight and project itself well on the international stage.
Baksong, anything you'd like to add about a unified world, a unified people?
I think this question fits very well with the main theme of what I want to say, which is that I firmly believe that multiculturalism is the X factor of Singapore's country brand. And we really have tremendous cultural resources that can be presented from our Nusantara heritage to Peranakan culture and so on. I would like to suggest that we could look at any MICE event as a gathering place for those cultures. That's one of Singapore's positive brand attributes as well. This hub for this gathering of world cultures. So any MICE event is like, to use my favorite metaphor of racial harmony, it's like a potluck, which is a development from the very old idea of a melting pot of cultures to the more recent salad bowl, in which the ingredients do not melt down into one in the melting pot, but remain distinct in the salad bowl. But the potluck is a further development of that, where the vegetables become human, and there's more agency in that process. Everyone is bringing the best of their culture to interact with the rest of the world.
Somehow you managed to weave in wellness into the menu as well. Closing lines, in the interest of time. September 1965, we were less than a month old, Singapore. And Lee Kuan Yew, in a very, very famous speech, told Singaporeans, never fear. Does that mantra still hold true today? Mel?
I think so. I think so. I mean, we discussed this morning itself whether Singapore is still as relevant economically to the world or not. I think that should, constantly be something that we think about. I mean, I always like to say that, one of the sources that drives Singapore's success is this sense of paranoia that we all have. We're all a bit paranoid, paranoid of failure, paranoid of slipping up. And I think that has worked well for us. I'm not propagating that, but I think that idea, or at least that consciousness that, look, we have our limitations, and that limitations can, bring us to a point where, we might not enjoy some of the success we have enjoyed. And how do we look at that? I say this, yesterday there was news, and I'm sure many of you would have heard this, in terms of the Singapore passport, again, being voted the most powerful passport in the world, right? So we do have the respect. We do command the respect. We do command that kind of soft power in the world, right? But the question is, are we allowing our size to limit how much we are willing to project our soft power? Bak Song mentioned earlier that we perhaps focus too much on our hard power and less so on our soft power. And I tend to agree. I think we can do a lot more on our soft power, especially with our hard power now coming to a more slower maturing stage, right, where incremental changes will happen. I think perhaps it's time we start focusing more on our soft power and how we can do much more on that, whether it's education, governance. I mentioned that the rest of the region is catching up. Really, in 10 years' time, what do you think is going to, differentiate Singapore and these other Asian powers? It's probably stability and good governance, right? And these are things that we can definitely talk about more and project better on a bigger stage.
Bak Song, never fear, A or nay?
Well, whenever you gain more agency, a sense of agency, fear begins to dissipate and dissolve. Therefore, I come back to my main theme, which is that I hope to leave all of you with a greater sense of agency, that individually you can, both in your personal and professional lives, make a difference to Brand Singapore. And that leads me back to my key message, which is all of you can be like the Raffles Hotel.
On that note, I think Singapore riding the next wave, we have a degree of optimism shared by our very esteemed panelists. We can, and all of us should play our part to do all we can in line with citizen ambassadorial roles that we all have. And I would like all of you to join me in thanking Bak Song and Mel for that very, very insightful sharing. Thank you.
Would you also join me in thanking Dylan for doing a great job with being the moderator? And a big round of applause for our moderators, our panel on stage. Thank you.